Make the choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the journey has started. And along the way, be inspired. Listen to the stories by joining the president of Howard University, Dr.WAYNE A.I. Frederick, on The Journey.
We have spoken with several political experts regarding the upcoming election. They have informed us as to what we should expect and the importance of mobilizing the vote. Our guest today has been working closely with Joe Biden's campaign, and she will share his plans for the African American community. Hello, my name is Dr. Wayne Frederick, and joining us today on The Journey is Ms. Symone Sanders, political strategist, commentator, and senior advisor for former Vice President Joe Biden's presidential campaign. All right, so welcome, Ms. Sanders, and thanks again for taking the time to do this. I know this is a very busy time for you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you are from Omaha, Nebraska. Let's start there. I'm in the Cathy Hughes School of Communications, and Cathy Hughes is from Nebraska as well. That's one of the first things I learned about her. And so it seems like Nebraska, Omaha in particular, is producing some great African-American women. Tell us what it was like growing up in Omaha.
Yes, it's always great to be mentioned in the same conversation as Cathy Hughes. She is a proud North Omahan, as am I. And I can tell you, growing up there, the first and the oldest female African-American owned newspaper in the country was started in Omaha, Nebraska by Mildred D. Brown. And growing up, it was that newspaper in addition to, the local news, your Omaha World Heralds and whatnot, but it was that newspaper that got the news for the community. And when I wanted to start a column while I was in college writing, it was that newspaper that gave me an opportunity to write. It's that newspaper that helped me hone my communications chops. And now my mother is actually the publisher of that newspaper. And she's writing about this election. She's writing about Cathy Hughes. And every now and then I get to make it into the paper. So I like to say that, North Omaha, the community that raised me, was the training ground for all of the great things that I have the privilege of doing right now.
And speaking of your mom, she was once the executive director of the Great Plains Museum, I believe. So what type of influence has she had on you?
My mother had a huge influence on me. She was what I like to call a serial entrepreneur. And she is the person that taught me that there's truly nothing you cannot do. If you put your mind to it, you sketch out a plan, you can do anything you want. You can take on any activity, any new job. So I really credit her for giving me the blueprint.
What was your early schooling and daily life like in Omaha, given the racial mix of the environment at that time? And also your dad was the former vice president of the Army Corps of Engineers, I believe. Retired from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But tell us a little bit about his influence as well and what it was like being in school and so on in that environment.
Yeah, my father was a chemist and ended up retiring as a chemist from the Army Corps of Engineers. And he tested the water, frankly. So I'm very keyed in and plugged in on the disparities as it relates to water in places all across this country, because those are the issues that my father focused on in his professional life. And I would just say, I feel like growing up in Omaha, Nebraska was a similar experience to, believe it or not, growing up in Chicago, Illinois, or growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or any, urban center, if you will, in this country. I grew up in a middle class Black neighborhood, but I went to school at a predominantly white Catholic high school. And so I really had the tale of two Omahas, if you will. And so I knew what it was like to have an opportunity at an institution that had smaller class sizes, that gave extracurricular opportunity. But I also knew what it was like to go home every day with my friends that didn't have the same opportunities that I had. And so now I think about the work that I have the privilege of doing, talking about these very clear disparities that exist in our society, especially as it relates to this current election. And I just really think that it drives home the point that the story of folks in Omaha, Nebraska is not that different from the story of folks all across this country, and that we are all really experiencing and living through um, very real life examples of these disparities that COVID has really only put a magnifying glass on every single day in different ways, different vantage points, but it's truly a very similar experience.
So I want to get to the issues of this election, but before we get there, let's cover 2016 and the primary and your involvement with the Sanders campaign. First to begin with, how did that come about?
Well, Jeff Weaver, Senator Sanders' then campaign manager, he found my resume from somewhere. Someone I used to work for called me and asked me, would I like to work for Senator Sanders? I ended up having the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with Senator Sanders. And it was in that conversation where we talked about the economy, we talked about criminal justice reform. We got into a little argument, but we reconciled. And by the end of that conversation, Senator Sanders asked me, did I have an idea of what I would like to do? And I told him I would like to be his national press secretary. And lo and behold, a couple days later, Jeff Weaver called me back, and I was the national press secretary. So it was a really great experience. I will say that knowing everything that I know now, I would go back and work for Senator Sanders all over again. I'm very proud of the movement that I helped build on that campaign, the lessons I learned, and I felt that Senator Sanders has truly done a good service to just people across this country in terms of raising up issues.
Right.
Now, as people know, I work for Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris. And I oftentimes get the question, Doc, they say, well, what was the difference? Why Bernie in 2016 and Joe Biden now? And just like I felt Senator Sanders was right for that moment, what he was saying was truly resonating. That's how I feel about Joe Biden now in 2020.
And as we come into 2020, obviously there's a lot of anxiety given what happened last time, polls not quite getting it. But this was a week where the polls closed and closed fairly dramatically around the Clinton campaign. The President Trump, then candidate Trump, basically really covered the Midwest. I remember hearing commentators curious about why he was flying to Michigan just before the election, et cetera. And obviously he would win 3 of those battleground states by just about 77,000 votes. That tightening isn't necessarily happening, but we have different issues. So let's just touch on some of the issues. The pandemic. We've seen the debates and heard the back and forth about what would be different in terms of managing the pandemic. What would be different in a Biden presidential White House in terms of managing this pandemic?
Well, Dr. Frederick, there would be a plan. The current president of the United States, in our opinion, has failed the American people. They have failed to get this virus under control. They have failed to put together a proper mitigation plan. You have the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, who is admitting that the White House is waving a white flag. They are surrendering to the virus, saying we cannot control the virus. Joe Biden, a year ago yesterday, warned that we were not prepared for a pandemic in the United States of America. In March of 2020, he put out his plan for what we should be doing, what he would be doing if he were president to get in the onset of this virus. That he talked about operationalizing the Defense Production Act, widespread testing in every community, social distancing, encouraging people to wear masks. Some of this is just the basics. So if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have the privilege to be elected president and vice president of the United States in November, there's going to be a real task before them in January 2021 when they take office. And the first thing that Joe Biden would be focused on would be tackling this virus and getting it under control. Again, make sure there's widespread testing in this country, a national mask mandate, putting together an equitable distribution plan for a vaccine, but also simultaneously tackling the economy. Because as this public health crisis is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening in tandem with an economic crisis in this country.
And I'm actually happy that you tied those because I'm often confused as a healthcare professional and a business leader sitting on the Federal Reserve Board and other boards. I'm often curious as to why we have not been tying the public health issue to the economy, because it seems to me that if we look at China and other countries that are emerging from this, who have really controlled the very pandemic and the virus, their economies have been able to emerge much sooner and, for that matter, even stronger. So why is it that connection is not being made more clearly, that even if you do have to have a shutdown that's temporary, what comes on the other side of that is even more economic growth without having another interruption? Why is that gap existing?
Sometimes it just baffles me, some of the decisions that this White House has made. But I'll tell you this, Vice President Biden has said this recently, that he does not want to shut down the economy. He wants to shut down this virus. And if we truly want to fully have operational economies in this country, in every single state, in every community, if we want to ensure that small businesses can open and can be profitable. Nearly 40% of African American owned businesses in this country have shuttered their doors and are at risk of not reopening. This pandemic has truly just disproportionately affected small business owners in this country, not to mention folks who, I'm having this interview with you, from my couch in my apartment because I can work remotely. But I'm thinking about the truck drivers and the folks who who work people to people services that cannot work from home. Those folks who are currently just being disproportionately affected by this pandemic, a K-shaped recovery, as we like to call it. And so I think really, if we understand that the best way to fully build back better, as we like to say, and get this economy back on track, if we fully understand that the best way to do that is, in fact, to mitigate and get this virus under control. So if we address the public health crisis, we are also addressing this economic crisis that is before us.
All right, so let's talk education. You have a degree from University of Nebraska, and obviously, when we look at the platform right now for higher education in particular, there are lots of concerns. And obviously, one of the platforms is, can we get low-income students into institutions like Howard and not have them leave with increasing student debt? What is the campaign's point of view on education?
So, look, first of all, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris believe that the ability to get a good quality education in this country should not depend on your socioeconomic status, your zip code, where your parents are from, or what you look like. And so, under a Biden-Harris administration, a few things are going to happen. They are going to ensure that if you want to attend a community college or a four-year public college or university or an HBCU, public or private, that you should be able to do so for free. Now, if you attend a community college, everybody can go to community college for free under a Biden-Harris administration, and we have a way to pay for that. If you attend a four-year public college or university or a historically Black college or university, public or private, and your family makes $125,000 a year or less, you will be able to attend that institution tuition free. Uh, so it's just really about making education affordable, accessible, but also for folks who maybe a four-year institution isn't on their to-do list. I talked about truck drivers, and we have yet to touch on the trades and electricians. Those are folks that aren't going to four-year college and universities, but they're receiving certificates. They are going into the building trades, and we believe that we need to support that continuing education as well.
So you brought up the economy. How will President Biden and Vice President Harris pay for free education? And to tie to that, the Republicans, because of the conservative arms of the party, or the ultra-conservative arms of the party, were absolutely allergic to deficits. The deficit now has ballooned beyond what we've ever seen. Obviously, the federal government is not bringing in taxes, as it thought it would under the corporate tax cut, et cetera. How would President Biden pay for this, and would that also increase the deficit even further, given the fact that another large stimulus bill is what's anticipated?
I remember when Democrats were in charge, and my Republican friends used to rail about the deficit, and now so we don't hear anything about the deficit under President Trump. So look, let me tell you, um, early on in the Trump administration, the Republicans passed a large tax cut bill that gave 1.3 trillion dollars in tax cuts to the wealthiest folks in this country and corporations. Under a Biden Harris administration, we're going to repeal $1.3 million of that Trump tax cut and ensure that the wealthiest people in this country pay their fair share. So we're going to raise that corporate tax rate to 28%. And under Biden Harris administration, we're going to ensure that not one person who makes less than $400,000 a year sees a tax increase. With that $1.3 trillion, that could cover education programs. Not and part of that education program is tripling funding to Title I schools across the country, so folks in their communities can attend good schools in whatever zip code they reside in. So this is really about ensuring that this K-shaped recovery that we're experiencing, where right now it is going up for the folks at the top, but people who are middle class or lower income, this economy is going down, that we change that. So it is actually a V-shaped recovery, as the president of the United States likes to claim it is.
The corporate tax rate before the Trump administration, if you could remind our viewers what that was, since the plan here is to take it up to 28%, I think to give people some reference, the 21% is what it is now, but what was it previously?
Well, to be clear, Donald Trump lowered the corporate tax rate. And now at one point, I mean, he's talking about taking it down even lower to 15%, I do believe. So I think that, and I know that there's been much in the news. I saw, the tweet from 50 Cent about saying he doesn't want to pay 62% in taxes. And I just want to be clear for folks that under a Joe Biden plan, yes, the wealthiest people in this country are going to pay their fair share, but won't be taxed at 62%. This isn't about us punishing anyone. Joe Biden has the same perspective as Warren Buffett, who believes that Warren Buffett believes that he shouldn't be paying more in his taxes than his secretary. And for Joe Biden, I think this is so critical because he sees the issues facing this country from the vantage point of folks in places like Scranton, in places like Omaha, Nebraska, in places like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, working people. And I think that it's been very clear, frankly, that the president approaches the economy and the issues facing the American people from the vantage point of folks on Wall Street. And in a Biden Harris administration, that's going to change. We're going to put working families first and build an economy that is equitable for all people.
So you mentioned 50 cents. So let's talk a little bit more about the election and some of the anatomy and the mechanics of the election. African-American men, 50 cents, I believe Dr. Dre, to name a couple, have come out and said that they're going to support President Trump's campaign because of issues like criminal justice reform and the taxes. What is your message and what is the Biden-Harris message to combat that?
So first I'll say, as it relates to criminal justice reform, I cannot think of a better dynamic duo, frankly, than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to address this moment that we are experiencing in this country. I talked about the public health crisis and the economic crisis. We would argue there are two additional crises that America is experiencing: a climate crisis and a crisis of racial injustice. And we all remember George Floyd, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And we know the names of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks. And those are just the names we learned within a few weeks of each other. In a Biden-Harris administration, we're going to ensure that we are bringing activists and advocates, police officers, chiefs, practitioners to the table to reinvigorate the Obama-Biden administration's 21st century task force on policing. In the first 100 days, Joe Biden is going to restart that. But he's also going to ensure that the Justice Department has the resources it needs to mete out justice in communities across the country. you talk about the changes that have been made in Ferguson and Baltimore during the Obama Biden administration years, and those came about because of pattern or practice investigations and consent decrees which were designed, which is really a commitment, if you will, that police departments enter into with the Justice Department to make changes, and then the Justice Department holds that police department accountable on those changes to so that it's better for the community. The Trump administration has not entered into one consent decree in its last 4 years, and they've only opened up one pattern or practice investigation. A Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration will ensure that their Justice Department is doing that real work. We're going to ensure that we have equitable representation across the government, but also that we're holding police departments accountable. And for our police departments, rogue police departments that do not meet the standards, that do not make the changes, we are not going to prioritize them for federal funding. But this is really about putting a plan together. And I want to tell folks out there that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made the commitment to do this work. So just I want people to take a look at our website, at our justice plan, joebiden.com/justice. Our plan for Black America is also on that website. And these are just not things that live on the internet. These are the commitments that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made to the American people. And so if we have the privilege of winning this election on November 3rd, I'm telling folks on November 4th, you have to hold us accountable on the commitments and the promises that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made.
Now,
and on the question of taxes, I do want to address the taxes, okay?
Sure,
Look,
absolutely.
our tax plan has laid out a series of proposals. We've talked about it, and these proposals do, in fact, impact wealthy and middle-class Americans differently. So to be clear, not one taxpayer who makes less than $400K a year would see a tax increase under a Biden administration. Matter of fact, we have proposed more than 18 different middle-class tax cuts, from a credit for first-time homebuyers to child care. But our plan will, in fact, raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans, but not to the tune of 62%. And so I do think what 50 Cent saw was a study that was an outlier. This is the only study I've ever seen with these numbers. It was a very ultra conservative anti-tax group, and it is extremely and patently false. And so folks have heard it here first, that Joe Biden's not going to raise taxes on folks that makes less than 400K. And no, 50 Cent's taxes are not going up to 62%.
All right, we'll make sure that we get a message out to him. but voter turnout has been historic already. We are a few days away from the election, and voter turnout, early voting, has already surpassed all of the early voting that took place in 2016. With that, what are you seeing on the ground and in the campaign in terms of that voter turnout?
Look, we are seeing record enthusiasm, and we're excited and emboldened about that enthusiasm. But we're not taking anything for granted, because I remember how I felt in 2016, how we all felt we had it in the bag, and we all remember election night on 2016, and it did not go the way a number of people in this country thought it would go. So from our campaign's perspective, we are not taking anything for granted. We are still running like we are 10 points down and broke. I always say that's the best way to do it. And so we are actively campaigning over the next couple of days. Just yesterday, Senator Harris was in Michigan. The day before, she was in Cleveland. Vice President Biden will be in Georgia tomorrow. He will also be campaigning in Florida. We had President Obama out last week. He'll be out again this week. Senator Cory Booker. We are really blanketing America, letting folks know that this is our opportunity to be heard. We all know how we have felt during this pandemic, and the reason we are conducting conversations via Zooms and Skypes and wearing masks when we leave our homes is because the current president of the United States does not know what he is doing. He has failed the American people. He has not put a plan together to mitigate this virus or get this economy back on track. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a plan. So our message to voters is that you have the power, that you cannot be stopped. If you go to the polls, your voices will be heard. So we are just really trying to, get the vote out and get the word out over these next couple of days. And we're down to the wire. We view Election Day as election deadline. So people are voting right now, and we are encouraging people to continue to go to the polls.
Now, the pundits are suggesting that the ground game is very different in the two parties. They're suggesting that while the Democratic candidates have the money in their coffers and they're blanketing the airwaves, that the Republican campaign is suggesting that they are focused on turnout on the day. Now, with that in mind, and being intimately involved with the campaign, how would you describe the ground game to turn out the vote, whether it's early or on the day of the election?
Well, I would describe our ground game as aggressive, and I think that sentiment and that perspective is bolstered by what we are seeing in terms of people turning out for early vote in person. To be clear, the numbers that you cited about record early vote turnout is a mixture of early in person and mail in ballots. But the reality is, I mean, we're seeing long lines in places like Alabama and North Carolina and Michigan and places all over this country because the people want to and will be heard. Now, our campaign is investing in a ground game. We have done so, but we're doing so safely. And so you haven't seen Joe Biden or Senator Harris holding large rallies. We are holding voter mobilization events that are social distance. We are doing canvas kickoffs and lit drops, and we are engaging with voters on the ground safely. But we are also investing in a paid media program, not just on television. We have specific paid media tracks for the African American community, and we're running a Latino program, and we're running a program targeted at young voters that is radio and digital, and yes, a little television, but really reaching people where they are. And I think our program has been successful, but we can't let up. And so we're not just sitting on oodles of cash, as our Republican friends like to suggest. We are, in fact, spending our money, but we're doing so wisely.
As we wrap, for the young people who will listen to this and watch this, hearing you and recognizing just how young you are and what you've accomplished at this point, it would be great for you to probably give us some insight into what's your next act, as well as what's your advice for those young people who want to be the next Symone Sanders and, as your name suggests, wants to be heard.
Thank you so much. Well, I will say I'm squarely focused on Election Day. I have been on this campaign trail for over 500 days, and I cannot wait to get to election deadline. And I fully believe that a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration will save lives. So when I have my mail-in ballot, Doc, and I'm going to go drop that thing in the mail today. And when I do so, I am voting for protection of pre-existing conditions. I am voting to be heard. I am voting for an economy that works for people that look like me. I'm voting for empathy and compassion and leadership and some people with a plan. So that's what I'm focused on. And for young people out there who are just experiencing this moment, wondering how they can make their voice heard, how they can be engaged and involved, I am here to tell you to show up. We need you. No one, as President Obama has said recently, is coming to save us. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. And if we show up at the ballot box, that's only part of the equation. Now, voting is a very critical tool and necessary tool in the toolbox of social justice. And it is a tool that if we don't use, the protesting and the advocacy and everything else is not as strong. So we have to vote, we have to show up, and then we have to show up the next day and the next day after that, because every major movement in this country has been fueled and propelled by young people. And in my opinion, that's not changing anytime soon.
All right, thank you very much. We wish you the best of luck, and we also are very proud of what you've been taking, not just your career, but taking the issues that affect the African diaspora. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good to see you.
Same here. Same here. Thanks for being here. My guest today was Symone Sanders, political strategist and commentator and senior advisor for former Vice President Joe Biden's presidential campaign. I'm Dr. Wayne Frederick. Please join me next time on The Journey.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.